This is part two of the chapter on newborns, and so we're going to be focusing on some of the physical development here. So, if for some unforeseen reason an infant loses weight due to illness or teething, an infant's body will slow its growth, the body will, but the brain will not. All right, this is important to remember. This is called head sparing, okay? But with prolonged malnutrition, there will be developmental issues in brain development. So many children in the world are malnourished, and it does affect them developmentally. The brain itself is not fully developed at birth. The first 2 years after birth, more growth will happen than at any other time in a human being's life. So, what's happening is the neurons that brain is developing after birth, the neurons are developing in the cortex for thinking, feeling, sensing, and the last part of the brain to develop will be the prefrontal cortex, and that's related to anticipation, planning, impulse control. Um, we haven't hit adolescence yet, but just let me say that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until a human being is approximately 25 years old. So we'll talk all about that in adolescence, but so that is the last portion to develop. Um, and as an infant, that prefrontal cortex is virtually inactive in the first months of infancy. It's totally inactive. So at birth, the brain contains 11 billion neurons, and this is much more than a person needs. But the newborn's brain has fewer dendrites and synapses than they will eventually possess. All right, so they're going to be growing. So the first few months and years, rapid growth and refinement will happen. And those dendrites, their growth is uh, it's so amazing that for that reason alone, the brain weight will triple from birth to 2 years old. It will triple from birth to 2 years old because of your dendrites growth. You're creating all these new connections. It's an amazing thing. So here's another figure that's gonna, it's just, I can't even, I teach it and I can't fathom it. 40,000 new synapses are formed every second in an infant's brain. Every second. So, after all of this has occurred, all right, after the rapid growth of dendrites, there is pruning. All right, so we have pruning twice in our life, when you're a toddler and when you're an adolescent. So, uh, what happens is those dendrites, those synaptic connections, if they uh, don't get used, they will literally atrophy and die. So, um, the good news is that the loss of those dendrites can increase brain power by opening up space in your brain for other things. So, but programs like Head Start, early childhood development, they're very important because we want to make sure that our brain is being used and utilized, and even though you might lose some of those connections, you certainly want to not lose more than necessary. Okay? All right? So, let's talk about immunization. All right? So, uh, obviously, immunization primes the body's immune system to resist disease. All right. Uh, we have the Zika virus, which is a terrible thing, and we've heard a lot about it since the Olympics in Rio this past year. Um, so a child needs their immunizations. It's important. There is no immunization for malaria. All right, there's no immunization for malaria. Um, Malnutrition, all right, in the countries where malaria might occur, there also are children who are suffering from malnourishment. And uh, protein calories, that is what children need. That is what creates malnutrition. They're not getting enough calories to sustain normal growth. I saw something in a news report where they had this, it was like the consistency of peanut butter, and they'd created these little packets of protein. Little packets. They were made in the United States, and children could take them in countries where there's malnutrition. And just these little protein packets changed everything for these children. And they were no longer malnourished from these little packets of protein. So, protein is incredibly important in the development of a child. Um, a third of the world's children in developing nations do suffer from malnutrition. All right. And because of that, they suffer from something called stunting. Stunting. And that is where they are short for their age because of chronic malnutritions. And this is most common in the poorest nations of the world. Um, and even worse than stunting is a term called wasting, where children are severely underweight for their age and height. And we certainly know the importance of uh, needing food. Food is energy. Food helps you grow, and we're also going to study later on in the semester some eating disorders. And what happens is when you're not receiving the calories, the nutrition that you need, and you start wasting away, your body turns in on itself, and it cannot sustain your body structures, and of course that will impair your brain development, and it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. So let's move on to growth. We're going to go from category to category. So growth is more rapid in infancy than during any period after birth. Infants double their birth weight by 3 months of age, and they triple it by their first birthday. Um, we have you're hoping to be in your 50th percentile to your 90th percentile. Uh, Same for boys and girls, except weight is slightly greater at ages 12 to 24 months. The height of a child depends upon the parents. That's heredity. So if you have tall parents, there's a possibility you're going to be tall, and short parents, be short. And if you have one tall and one short, then you'll probably be medium height. So infants are not, let me repeat, not scaled down versions of adults. Infants are actually top heavy, all right? Top heavy. Their heads and trunks are extra large, okay? So if you try to sit up a baby, have them sit, they very often will topple over. And certainly walking is a very precarious situation because they're totally off balance. Their hips, legs, and feet catch up at a later time. So when the infant is in the womb, the head grows first, and then the arms and legs, and then the hand and the feet. So babies, remember this, babies are top heavy. They are top heavy. All right. So our next category is nutrition. And we already talked about malnourishment and growth. So now we're going to talk about nutrition. Um, a 2 month old, 40% of their body's energy in a 2 month old is devoted to growth. Growth requires so much energy that a huge number of calories needs to be ingested, which is great about breastfeeding, is giving the child the calories that they need. So babies need 50 calories per pound. Adults only need 15 to 20 calories per pound. So you can see that the babies are really consuming a lot more calories. Breastfeeding is best. It's the perfect combination of fats, carbs, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. Obviously, not everyone can breastfeed. My children are adopted, so they were not breastfed. So, we certainly have some good replacement formulas on. But of course, the pluses of breastfeeding a baby is number one, babies get sick less because the milk contains the mother's antibodies, and that's very, very helpful. Number two, babies are less prone to constipation and diarrhea. That's an upside if you're a mom. And number three, they make the transition to solid foods more easily because they're accustomed to the changes in the taste of the breast milk due to the changes in the mom's diet. So if the mom is, I read something once where the mom had eaten a lot of carrots, and when the baby was no longer being breastfed and they gave the baby carrot juice, it's like its face lit up because it loved the taste of the carrot juice because the mom had been drinking carrots, eating carrots. So that's cool. And number four, breast milk cannot be contaminated. All right, so uh, you're supposed to feed your child breast milk for the first year with iron enriched food introduced gradually: cereal, then veggies, fruits, and lastly, meats. And it's a good idea to introduce only one food at a time. All right, that's the way you can check for allergies. Uh, I'm reading some new studies now on peanut allergies where they're taking the children, they're actually introducing peanuts into the diet at a very young age to build up that tolerance for peanuts instead of waiting till a later point when the allergy will have already occurred. Um, so the good thing about bottle feeding certainly was for me, I didn't have to be the only person doing it. So somebody else can get up in the middle of the night and feed the baby. So that's good. By 2 years old, the growth starts to slow down, so children need to eat less. But what happens at 2 years old? Children start to become very picky eaters, and they are becoming much more independent. But do not worry, they are still getting enough to eat, even though it seems that they are not, and do not punish them or reward them. You just try to give them a variety of foods that they like, and the more you introduce, the more chances that they will uh, eat. So let's try, well, let's not try, let's do. Let's talk about the nervous system. Um, we've already had a little bit of a discussion on the dendrites and the brain growth, but let's talk about it a little more clearly. There is a huge change in the brain and the nervous system. Um, and you'll remember from Introduction to Psychology us talking so much about the neurons and our neurotransmitters, and it's all about sending the messages back and forth so that we can think and perform and feel and act. And so the basic unit in your brain, okay, and within your nervous system is that neuron, all right? So at birth, the brain is 3/4 of a pound, all right, which is 25% of the weight of an adult brain. And at 3 years old, it's 80% of its ultimate weight. So, as we said before, it will triple. It is an amazing thing. So, we have that. It's, think of it as your brain is a partially finished house, and as experience and time goes on, that experience will help develop and finish furnishing that house. So that will be good. um, this is the end of lecture 2, and we will continue on and finish up the newborns with lecture 3, starting with motor skills. So I'll see you next time.